The night the sky trembled, no one in Europe slept. From the farthest villages of Poland to the silent monasteries of Hungary, people heard it a sound that did not belong to any world they knew. It was not thunder. It was not wind. It was the heartbeat of the earth itself, the echo of countless hooves breaking across the horizon. At first they thought it was a storm that never reached the sky, a storm that galloped. But as dawn broke, they saw the truth. The plains were trembling, the air carried dust, and through that dust shadows moved fast, silent, disciplined. They said the riders came with the sun at their backs, turning morning light into fire. Their armor gleamed like mirrors. Their horses snorted smoke. Their banners bore no symbols, only silence. No one knew their language. No one had seen their faces. They called them the ghosts from the east. And when those ghosts spoke, it was not in words, but in rhythm. The rhythm of hooves, the drumbeat of empire, the whisper of destiny. The chronicles say the first to hear them were the shepherds by the Carpathian hills. They ran to the churches shouting that the mountains were alive, that an army was descending from the clouds. Priests rang the bells, calling men to prayer. But even the bells were drowned by the sound that grew wave after wave until the very walls of the chapel began to tremble. Some claimed to see lightning streak across the sky without thunder. Others swore they saw black banners moving like smoke against the dawn. But those who stood closest, those who truly listened, said they heard something else. Voices, not human voices, not shouts or cries, but something ancient, layered and endless, the chant of riders who had crossed not just the steppe, but time itself. "Listen," said one old monk, trembling as he pressed his ear to the earth. "They are not coming, they are already here." And in that moment, the wind shifted. It carried with it the smell of sweat, leather, and burnt grass, the smell of war, the smell of the Mongols. No one in Europe knew their names, not yet. They did not know the word Mongol, nor the meaning of Genghis. But they knew fear, the kind of fear that sleeps in the bones, not the heart. Stories spread faster than truth. In the villages, they said these riders had come from the edge of the world where the sun never sets. They said their horses drank fire, and their arrows whispered death. Some even said they were not men at all, but spirits sent to cleanse the earth before Judgment Day. But in the east, under the same sky, men already knew the truth. They called them the sons of the steppe, children of iron and frost, raised by wolves, guided by storms. Their leader had long been dead, but his will lived on. Temujin, the man the world would one day call Genghis Khan, had left behind not just an empire, but a hunger that crossed generations, burning in the eyes of his grandsons. Batu, Subutai, the storm bearers of a dead king. They were the wind made flesh, and on that night the wind began to move west. Europe did not yet know it, but history had just taken its first breath, and it smelled of smoke and horse blood. Somewhere beyond the Carpathians, beneath a blood-red dawn, the riders slowed their pace. They looked westward toward kingdoms, fat with gold and pride, toward cathedrals that reached for heaven and walls that had never known true fear. And then one of them raised his horn. The sound was low, ancient, like the call of a god forgotten by men. The horses pawed the ground. The riders lowered their heads, and from that silence, the steppe itself began to roar. For the first time, Europe would hear the voice of the horse, and the world would never sound the same again. Before Europe ever heard the thunder of their hooves, the sons of the steppe had already been forged, not in cities nor temples, but beneath the endless sky. They were born in a land with no walls, where horizon met horizon, and every breath was a promise between man and wind. They did not pray to gods, they rode them. Their horses were their prayers carried on the backs of storms. Each child of the steppe learned to ride before he could walk, to shoot before he could speak. They grew in silence and hardship. Their lullabies were the cries of wolves, their lessons were the laws of hunger. And hunger was the first teacher. It was hunger that taught them to hunt, hunger that taught them to share, hunger that taught them the one truth that would echo through every conquest. Only those who have starved know how to hunt. They called their home the eternal blue sky, the great vault above the grasslands where clouds moved like herds and lightning walked among men. Under that sky, a boy named Temujin rose from nothing. His father poisoned his clan, scattered his family, left to die. He had no kingdom, no army, no crown, only the will to survive. But from that will he forged something greater than empire. He forged order. He gave law to chaos. He gave unity to tribes that had known only blood and betrayal. He took the scattered sparks of 1,000 riders and turned them into a storm that could swallow continents. Temujin became Genghis Khan universal ruler, and under his command the steppe became one heartbeat. When he spoke, men listened. When he fell silent, even the wind held its breath. His riders were not soldiers, they were extensions of his mind. Every movement was discipline, every silence was intent. They carried no heavy armor, no golden crests. Only the bow, the horse, and the coat of the wolf. The pack survives, the lone dies. With that code, they crossed deserts and mountains that no map dared draw. They burned cities not out of hatred, but out of clarity to show the world that walls were only the illusions of the weak. And when Genghis died, his body was hidden beneath the earth, but his spirit, his hunger remained. It moved in the blood of his descendants, men who carried his silence like a weapon. Among them were Batu, the grandson, and Subutai, the master of shadows, the strategist who saw not the world as it was, but as it could be taken. To them, the steppe was no longer enough. The empire had reached China-Persia, the edges of Rus. The horizon had grown small, and so they looked west toward the lands of stone churches and iron kings, toward Europe, a place fat with peace and certainty. Subutai saw it first. He studied the rivers, the mountains, the winds. He sent riders far ahead not to conquer, but to listen. They listened to the silence of the forests, the tolling of church bells, the laughter of men who had forgotten fear. Then he spoke to Batu. These lands do not yet know the storm. When they hear the first thunder, they will kneel not from strength, but from the memory of it. And so the decision was made. The West would be tested, not for gold, not for land, but for destiny. The order went out across the plains. From the Volga to the Irtysh, from the Altai to the frozen edges of Siberia, men began to move. Tens of thousands each carrying the whisper of their ancestors, each knowing that to die in the saddle was to live forever in the wind. The steppe darkened with riders. Herds of horses stretched like rivers of black silk. And when they began their march, the sky itself seemed to follow. They sang as they rode, not songs of joy, but chants of endurance. Low, guttural, endless. A rhythm that blended with the hooves until the world itself became their drum. From that rhythm, Europe would one day craft legends. They would say the Mongols could ride for days, without rest, that their horses could drink the morning dew and gallop again. They would say their arrows curved with the wind their eyes saw beyond mountains. But what they truly saw was the face of inevitability. For the sons of the steppe did not believe in conquest. They believed in motion. As long as the wind moved, as long as the horse ran, the world was still theirs to claim. And somewhere beyond the rivers of Rus, beneath the pale moon, Subutai lifted his gaze westward and whispered into the dark, "Let them hear our horses, for the wind has carried silence too long." The first city fell before anyone understood what had come for them. It was not an army as Europe knew it. No shining knights, no banners in the wind, no slow march of honor. The Mongols did not announce their wars. They arrived like the night silent, sudden and absolute. When the scouts of the Russes returned from the east, their faces were gray with dust and terror. They spoke of riders who moved faster than wind, who never stopped to eat, who struck before dawn and vanished before the sun could rise. Their leader was a man called Batu, but his shadow was longer than his name. Behind him rode Subutai, the general who could read the world like a map written by the gods. Together they crossed the frozen rivers of Russia as if they were roads of stone. Cities that had stood for centuries, Ryazan, Vladimir, Kiev, turned to ash within days. No siege engines, no drawn-out battles. Just precision, speed, and fire. In the Chronicles of Kiev, one line remains: they came with thunder and left with silence. By the spring of 1241, they reached the borders of Europe. The air was heavy with fear. In the monasteries, monks whispered that the apocalypse had begun. They called the invaders Tartars from Tartarus, the pit of hell, for surely no men could ride from such distances and still breathe. But the Tartars did breathe, and their horses never tired. When they entered Poland, the ground itself seemed to flinch. Villages emptied before the first arrow flew. Fires burned without hands to feed them. And everywhere the same sound, the whisper of hooves like rain that would never end. At Liegnitz, they met the first true resistance, an army of knights from Poland, Bohemia, and the Teutonic Order, their armor gleaming beneath banners painted with crosses. They prayed to God for deliverance, but God was silent. The Mongols began to circle them slowly, deliberately. Their horns sounded not in chaos, but in perfect rhythm. They did not charge, they danced. The knights advanced confident in their steel, but every step forward met only dust and disappearing shadows. Then the trap closed. Arrows fell like a storm that had learned how to aim. Each rider fired 6 times before the knights could raise their shields. The earth drank their blood faster than rain. And when the smoke cleared, nothing remained but bodies and horses still breathing. In the chaos, a single knight was said to have shouted, "They fight like spirits, not men." But the spirits did not answer. They rode on. By the time word reached the rest of Europe, the east was burning. Hungary trembled. Villages along the Danube vanished in a single night. Priests spoke of punishment, kings spoke of vengeance, but none dared move. The Pope sent messengers to the east, but none returned. The Mongols did not take cities for glory. They took them for information. Every victory was a question answered. Every retreat was a trap waiting to close. And always above the smoke, there was the sound, the voice of the horse. That endless rhythm, that heartbeat of the steppe, that reminder that this was not an invasion, it was inevitability. Europe's faith began to tremble. Some said the Antichrist had risen in the east. Others said it was God's own wrath cleansing a corrupt world. But the truth was simpler. The steppe had remembered them. The world had grown soft, and now the wind had come to teach it how to move again. At night, survivors spoke of strange sights, riders moving through smoke, without casting shadows, horns that sounded like thunder from the clouds, and a great black horse whose eyes burned red in the dark. No one knew if these stories were true, but they spread like fire, and fear spread faster than any army. In a monastery near Vienna, a monk wrote a single line before the Mongols reached the gates. "We prayed for angels. Instead, the sky sent horses." By the summer of that year, the invincible kingdoms of Europe had begun to crumble. Walls meant nothing. Faith meant nothing. The world had changed its language, and its new voice spoke through hooves and dust. Then, as suddenly as they had come, the riders began to withdraw. Not defeated, not repelled, simply gone. The priests called it a miracle. The kings called it salvation. But in the east, the wind carried a different truth. Subutai had turned his eyes toward another horizon. The storm was not over, it was only waiting. And far from the ashes of Liegnitz, on a hill where no one dared climb, a single horse stood alone, its breath rising into the dawn. It listened, and somewhere beyond mountains and memories, the steppe answered back. When the storm reached Hungary, the sky itself seemed to split. Spring 1241. The fields of Pest were green, the rivers wide and calm. Fishermen spoke of an early harvest. Priests spoke of peace. But the wind that carried their prayers eastward never brought them back. The Mongols had come. They crossed the Carpathians not as invaders, but as fate. Riders emerged from the mist like spirits taking shape, their banners trailing no color, their faces veiled in dust and silence. King Bela IV had gathered all that remained of Europe's courage. Nobles, knights, peasants, and priests. They built camps along the Sajo River, their fires glowing against the night like candles before a storm. And still no one believed the stories. No one believed that men could move like ghosts, strike from nowhere, and vanish into the wind. But the night before battle, the earth began to hum. A low vibration, not sound, but memory. The horses felt at first restless in their pens. Then the men. They looked toward the east and saw the horizon flicker. Lightning but with no storm clouds, thunder but no rain. The first Mongol arrows arrived before dawn. They fell not from heaven but from silence. Each one carried fire. Each one found its mark. The river turned red before the sun had risen. And as the smoke lifted, Europe looked upon the true face of the east. They came in waves, their armor made of leather, and light their horses moving as one living creature. Drums rolled like thunder over the fields. And above them, the sky seemed to bend beneath the sound of 1,000 horns. Subutai stood on a hill watching the chaos below with the calm of a man who had seen centuries pass. Every movement of his hand was a storm released. Every silence was a trap closing. Batu rode at the center, his sword a flash of sunlight, his horse black as the night he carried within. When the Hungarian line broke, the river carried away their cries. Knights in shining armor drowned beneath the weight of their own steel. Priests prayed in Latin while their world burned in Mongol. And through it all, the rhythm of hooves, the voice of the horse, unbroken, unending, unstoppable. In the chronicles of the survivors, it is written, the wind itself became their messenger. The sky bowed to their command. By noon, the camp was gone. By dusk, so was Hungary. No army stood against them now. The road to Vienna lay open, Europe held its breath. But then, the storm stopped. Without warning, without reason, the riders turned east. Their drums fell silent, their dust faded from the horizon. Kings called it a miracle. Priests called it divine mercy. But those who listened closely knew better. The wind had changed. Far away beyond deserts and mountains, the great Khan Ogedei, son of Genghis, had died. The summons had come for every prince of the blood to return home to choose the next ruler of the world. And so at the edge of Europe's ruin, the storm withdrew. Not defeated, not finished, simply waiting. Villages rose from ashes, churches rebuilt their walls. But the earth never forgot. Even as grass grew over the graves, the ground still carried the echo of that thunder. Travelers said that on quiet nights, if you pressed your ear to the soil near Mohi, you could still hear it, the heartbeat of distant horses, the whisper of a wind that had once changed the world. For the Mongols, it was only another campaign. For Europe, it was the end of an age. The people of the West learned that the world was larger than their prayers and that the East was not a shadow but a mirror. Subutai never set foot on European soil again, yet his name unspoken lingered in the wind like the promise of another dawn. And when his riders crossed back into the steppe, they looked once more at the setting sun. The youngest among them asked, "Will we ever return?" Subutai smiled the kind of smile that belongs only to men who have heard the voice of destiny. "We never left," he said. "The wind carries us still." And as night fell over the grasslands, the storm that had once swallowed empires was swallowed in turn by silence. Yet somewhere between the plains and the stars, the eternal blue sky whispered back, "Ride, for the world is not done remembering you." Centuries have passed. The fires are gone, the bones have turned to dust, and yet the wind still remembers. Across the plains of Hungary, the grass sways as if stirred by unseen hooves. Across Poland, the bells still toll at dusk, and old men still tell their grandchildren of the year the sky spoke in thunder. No one can say where the riders went. Some believe they vanished into legend, others that they became the wind itself, forever moving, never dying. But if you stand at the edge of the steppe and close your eyes, you can still hear them. A whisper that rises from the earth and fades into the sky. Not a ghost, not a memory. A rhythm ancient, unbroken, eternal. The voice of the horse. In the east, where dawn is born, the steppe still stretches beyond the reach of any horizon. The herds still move like shadows across the grass. The eagles still circle over bones older than empires. And sometimes when storms gather over the Onon River, lightning touches the earth the way it did the night a child named Temujin was born. The elders say that when the sky flashes twice, the spirits of his riders are crossing again, racing the wind, laughing at death. Their empires gone, their cities buried under centuries of dust, their names carved into the forgotten corners of maps. Yet history has never learned how to silence them. Every empire that came after borrowed their shadow. Their tactics became the language of war, their legend the compass of fear. Europe never forgot the day the East arrived without warning, not because of the fire they brought, but because of what the fire revealed, that power, true power, is not the crown on a king's head, it is the will that outlives him. In the monasteries of Krakow, monks wrote of angels and demons of spirits that came to test mankind. But some among them began to understand. They saw that history was not written by the victors, it was written by those who refused to stop. And so the story endured, from parchment to whisper, from whisper to myth. Even now in the heart of Europe, you will find small wooden carvings of horses hung in old houses, not as idols, but as warnings. A reminder that peace is only the pause between storms. For the Mongols were not merely conquerors, they were messengers. Messengers from a world that spoke in hooves and wind, telling mankind one simple truth, that everything which stands still will one day fall. The steppe has no walls, no boundaries, no past tense. It moves, it breathes, it remembers. And when the wind blows from the east carrying dust across the mountains, you can almost hear it, a chorus, distant but familiar singing, not of conquest, but of continuity. We are the sons of the steppe. We do not die, we ride. Some say the sound is only the wind. Others say it is the earth dreaming of its own beginning. But those who have truly listened know it is the same voice that spoke to Europe 8 centuries ago, the same rhythm that turned kingdoms to ash and fear into legend. The voice of the horse, the voice of the storm, the voice of history itself. And in that voice lives a question one whispered across generations, from soldier to scholar, from father to child. When the wind rises again, will we be ready to listen? The sky over the steppe remains vast and silent, but silence, as the Mongols once taught the world, is never truly empty. For somewhere in that endless horizon beyond the reach of any empire, the hoofbeats begin again. They start as a whisper, then a rhythm, then a song. The same song that carried a boy from hunger to immortality, that burned a continent and reshaped the earth. It is not a song of endings, but of return. Because history does not sleep, it only waits for the wind to remember. And when it does, the world will tremble once more.